For there is a clash for equality, a perpetual struggle for justice. Within my strangled heart, liberty surrounds me. I should know this. It is composed of my most righteous counterpart. An excerpt from Titans of Corruption by Carl Robertson.
Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me.
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to the review of Titan of Corruption by Carl Robertson. I love this book because it's a book that delves into the matter of humanity. It is humanistic. It's a book that has to do with we human beings, how we've inflicted pain upon one another and how we've troubled one another. And one thing I love about this book is the fact that it is human oriented, it is human centered, it is existence centered. It has to do with human, it has to do with us. And that's a trait that I particularly love about poetry. That's something I intentionally love about poetry. I don't just like reading poetry that is just, for pleasure's sake or just for fun. But I love to be able to read a poetry. I love poetry that are not just centered on some mere ideas. I particularly love poetry that are centered on deep issues. I love poetry that are most centered on the matter of humanity. I love poems that are extremely philosophical. And I love poems that will keep me mulling long after I've read it. And that's what I experienced when I read through Titans of Corruption by Carl Robertson. It is something that has to do with politics, and part of it has to do with we human beings, how we've troubled ourselves, how we've crossed degradation, indignation, and put ourselves into some certain issue or certain aspect that we ought not to have done. As a poet, I love poems that are able to pull me in as a reader. I love poems that I'll be able to read and I'll be able to derive some knowledge out. And I love poems that are very contemplative. I love poems that are counterintuitive. I love poems that keeps me mulling, that keeps me thinking long after I've read it. Before I talk about this book, I'd love to read to you a page, that's the introduction page, which expound on the title of the book, that talk a bit about what the book is actually all about. So I'm gonna be reading to you the introduction page. Titan of Corruption denotes that no oppressor will ever allow those who he owns fully oppressed to ever become equal to himself. And his laws of equality will always be full of deception against the poor, no matter their color. This is especially for most black, brown, and poor white communities in the United States, whose trust for redemption and hope still placed highly within their religious faith. The fortunate rich and elite appears to be seeking the reward of a civil war involving chauvinistic principles based against a people who are considered by some as destroyers of culture, a parasite within the nation, and a menace to their elite economic deals. No differently than the thought of Adolf Hitler and the extermination of millions who were also considered born and raised German citizens. This is what Titans of Corruption is trying to point out. All Americans, no matter their color, are caught up within the bigotries of the established wealthy, just as we are continually seeking throughout our nation today. It is a wake-up that each American citizen has a duty to make this nation a better and more equitable place to live for all our people and children, which then create a significantly better future for all United States citizens as a whole. Within this revised edition, Titans of Corruption and Other Poems, Robertson has added additional poem in this book and uses unique metaphorical articulation and expression to convey to his readers what he perceives as the ups and downs of American society. When it comes to economic, political, and educational status of his black culture, Robertson considered that its poem, as with any other logical interpretation, will inspire and enlighten readers from all walks of life, background, religion, ages, and cultures. The people of America must fully understand that unless the United States government makes some serious and drastic change for the betterment of all its citizens, America will wake up one day to find out, as quoted from Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently, half slave and half free. What was stated by President Lincoln years ago holds the gist of the truth today, except that within today's world, it is economic slavery which is causing this nation divide. I was enthralled while I read through the introduction part of this book, and in my own perception, I think degradation or its type, it's not only particular to America alone, it is something that is predominant in most countries. It is something that you can find almost in most of the nations of the world, and the world itself has been thrust into segregation, into racism and all of that. And that's something that I found exceptional in this book. That is something that I found absolutely great in the book. I love the fact that the book seeks to expound on the matter of humanity. It seeks to question the nature and how we've misplaced and trade a love for hatred, how we've been able to torment one another without conscience. And this is actually a point that I particularly love to expound in the matter of humanity. And while I read through this book, while I read through Carl A Robertson, Titans of Corruption, it had me mulling, it had me thinking, and I could find some point exponent in the book resonating with Wole Soyinka, Climate of Fears. And that's why I term my subtitle for the review of Titans of Corruption as it's a book that helps us to look into the quest for dignity in a demonized world. Before I proceed, I'd love to read to you about the author. Carl Robertson is a father of 5 girls and 1 son, and a grandfather of 25 children. Robertson and his wife Caroline Tate Robertson are both from New Ocean, Louisiana. After Hurricane Katrina 2005, they relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, where they lived for about 10 years, and during the month of March 2017, they moved from Atlanta and are now residing in Lawton, Oklahoma. To many who know him, Carl Robertson is thought of by most as an atypical American citizen, speaking his mind through his writing and poetry of what he considers as persistent wrong perpetrated against the poor within American society, with the African American culture being the primary target of those wrong. Although not well known throughout its vast society, the author sees himself as a societal activist who has litigated 2 employment cases within the 5th 1998 to 2001 and 11th 2013 to 2019 U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal, which also included a writ of certiorari to the sculptors. Robertson also calls himself the unknown old school poet, writing a variety of poems, religion, cultural, romantic, humorous, etc., some of which are included within this book, Titans of Corruption and other poems. This book actually details the subject of annihilation, of racism, of prejudice, of corruption, of degradation, of debasement, and the reduction of the human dignity to nothing. We live in a demonized world. We live in a world whereby human qualities are being tampered with. We live in a kind of world whereby some wealthy people look down on the poor. We live in a kind of world whereby you see the rich oppressing the poor, we see the rulers oppressing the ruled, and you see people in government position not taking the interest of the people at heart. You see people being deceived, and all of this is what the author aimed at communicating in his book. All of this quality, all of this feature, all of this degradation of human rights, and all of this reduction to nothing, the quality of the human sense, is what the author seeks to expound in Titans of Corruption. I particularly love to expound on this because sometimes I imagine the conscience of human beings, for them to be able to annihilate one another, for them to be able to trouble another man, for them to be able to look down on other people, and for them to be able able to praise the worth of other people against another, for them to be able to judge based on the color of people. And you find racism almost in every aspect. As I read in the book actually seems to center this particular subject towards the American. Like it's trying to talk about how the black people are being degraded in the American society, and how some people are being judged, how some people are being criticized based on the color of their skin. All of this is what the author is trying to communicate, particularly to the American society. But in my own perception, I think this is a case that is not only particular to American alone, it is widespread. It is seen all over the world. It's a case that is rampant in all the nations of the world, whereby you see racism, you see prejudice, you see human beings expressing unnecessary hatred towards one another because they form a particular tribe, or they form a particular country, or they have a particular color, or based on their sexual orientation. All of this is what Carl Robertson seeks to communicate in Theatres of Corruption. And one thing I'd love to say about the book is that I love the author's use of metaphor. I love his storytelling techniques. It's actually a collection of essays and poems, and the collection together as a whole expound on the matter of humanity. It expounds on something that I found very important, and I'd love to recommend this book to even university students and people who'd love to expound more on humanity, to human activists and love of literature at large. Some titles in this book are biblical in nature. Some are proverbial. Some ask a lot of wisdom encapsulated in it. And I jot some quotes which I'm gonna imbibe in my life later on, because I found the book, it's a look into what humanity thinks totally. Absolutely, it is undiluted, it is profound, it is didactic in meaning, and it is very instructive, it is communicative. I particularly love a poem here titled A Child's Reasoning. In this poem, I love the author's choice of word. I love his use of, the word child as a metaphor to communicate to we adults that, we ought to have the brain of a child. Children doesn't know anything about segregation. They don't know anything about racism. They meet one another and embrace one another irrespective of anywhere they find themselves, irrespective of their color, irrespective of whatsoever they're even passing through. So here, in this particular poem titled A Child's Reasoning, the author is trying to invite us to take in the psychology of a child, to embrace the brain of a child, because we adults, we are the one that will impose law, we are the one that will torment one another, we are the one that would annihilate one another, we are the one that make unnecessary laws, that make unnecessary rules, and even deprive people of what is actually going to benefit them. It expounds on human hatred. It expounds on human, lack of conscience. It expounds on human annihilation. It expounds on the degradation of one man to another man. It expounds on the way with which people that ask power often impose bad things on the powerless. It expounds on the oppression of the less privileged by the privileged. It expounds on the oppression, the annihilation of the poor by the rich. It expounds on the degradation of the masses by people in high position. And all of this is what is making a world in a state of chaos, where you find a particular country raging war against another country, and you find a particular people raging war against another people claiming what doesn't belong to theirs, and all of these things that we can see in the world today. It's all that Carl Robertson expound in Theatres of Corruption. Carl Robertson introspection is very evocative. And I love the fact that his book talk about the things rooted into objective truth that are sadly be ignored by many today. If we would check our heart like Carl has invited us to do, we would see that we would start living the world that we all deserve. We will see that we will start living in a world that is free of vices, that is free of corruption, that is free of annihilation, that is free of wickedness, that is free of every sort of bad things you can ever imagine. The book has a lot of amazing poems in it, but there are some poems that pique my interest, and there are those titled The Pernicious Phenomenon, the narrative poem Forever Gone, A Child's Reasoning that I talked about earlier on, Blessed Am I, Degradation, The Outspoken, and the titular poem itself, Titans of Corruption. But I'd love to read a particular poem titled The Pernicious Phenomena, but I'm not starting from the beginning. I think I will start from stanza 3, and it reads that our families are being dismantled, cultural and social values are now dismissed. We no longer teach past wisdom to our young. Our need is greed. We have no more love for one another. I am overcome by desolation. Times took me for destruction. My fears are doubled. I must always be careful of my old enemies and even more cautious of my younger brothers. Wow, that's proverbial. That's very proverbial. If you are to look into the lines and stanzas in a literary sense, you would find that each line has an extensive interpretation and meaning. But I'm not in a class. If you are to take a deep look into each of the lines and stanzas, we would see that every line has an extensive meaning, which I would not love to delve more. So I keep reading. Some will smile in my face and even greet me, while knowing in their heart that their desires are to maliciously scheme an opportunity to long a knife into my back. My kindred have been demolished. My old foes observe every move and provides the mean for my annihilation, brother against brother, while the house of my clans is ransacked. Wow. That's another deep interpretation into different topic. Then I go on. Reborn, my dear black brother, it is no accident that we face demise. Suppression acts many faces. Our strength is weakened only through loyalty we thrive. Or we could continue to wipe out our male population from the young to the old, being gullible shall be at the expense of our daughters, because our men will not be alive. If we continue to kill ourselves by the sword, it should be obvious that by the sword, black men, women, and children will all surely die. However, if we were to give more devotion towards our dignity and less commotion toward our sanity, no man could stop us from becoming solidified. Wow. And that's something I love about the book. It's trying to embrace unity in place of segregation. It's trying to help us to question the difference between good and bad. And it's trying to help us to understand the philosophical, the psychological definition of the human character. Because some people are just called by human alone. They just represent themselves as human, through their sex, being a male or a female. But the human quality is not in them. The conscience is not in them anymore. The conscience and the human quality, they've thrown to the dogs. And they're very vile, they're very cruel, they're very wicked, and they establish evil with no remorse. They enact wickedness with no sense of empathy. They enact wickedness with no sense of, pity, compassion, and the like. I don't want to talk about this book in entirety. I just want to give you a short video book recommendation for you to check out the sort of message, the sort of information that Carl Robertson had to communicate in his book, Titans of Corruption and Other Poems. I love this book. And it's very amazing. It speaks to me in volume. It resonates with the matter of humanity. It touches the matter of we human beings. And I find myself mulling over as I keep reading through it. So this is where I'm gonna stop my video book review of Carl Robertson, Titans of Corruption. If you'd like to get a copy of this book, I left a link in the description part of this video for you to get a copy directly on Amazon. If you watch this video to this point, you need to click on the subscribe button. I want to urge you to please click on the subscribe button over there. Also turn on the notification bell so you can get notified anytime I release new videos. Thank you very much for watching my video book review of Titans of Corruption by Carl Robertson. See you in my next video. Goodbye.